Eleanor Voss was a name that floated in the elite circles like a whispered myth, part fascination, part fear. She had inherited a vast fortune from her late father, a pioneering figure in aerospace and quantum communications. Her image, often frozen in the media as a porcelain-skinned woman with piercing silver eyes, stood in stark contrast to her profound silence. Eleanor hadn't spoken a word in 8 years. Not a greeting, not a whisper, not even a gasp. She lived in her towering mansion perched above the Pacific cliffs, surrounded by security drones, biometric gates, and an internal staff trained to never speak unless absolutely necessary. To the public, she was simply the silent heiress. Some said it was grief her mother had vanished during a secret government mission when Eleanor was only 12. Others insisted it was psychological trauma after a near-death experience during a space tourism trial her father's company launched. But beneath the sensational theories, there were subtler ones. Quiet murmurs among former scientists and defense. Insiders suggested something far stranger. Eleanor hadn't stopped speaking because she couldn't. She had stopped because she mustn't. Inside her estate, she spent her days immersed in strange research. Projects that seemed disconnected to outsiders. Frequency mapping, ancient scripts, interdimensional signal detection. She never left the mansion unless it was for her annual checkup at the institute she funded herself, the Voss Neural Research Institute. Many assumed she was simply eccentric, spending her billions in isolation, haunted by loss or madness, but those who worked near her knew she was anything but mad. Her presence was commanding. Without uttering a sound, Eleanor Voss could still fill a room. Her staff communicated with her via gesture-based AI, facial expression analysis, or an interface. She had developed a custom visual language coded with glances and micro-movements. She oversaw her operations with absolute clarity. Engineers, technicians, and AI researchers all answered to her, and somehow, her silence felt more powerful than any CEO's speech. And yet something shifted as the years passed. The silence that once served as her fortress began to resemble a prison. Her eyes, always intense, started to show flickers of urgency. The coded messages she sent to her lab teams became more complex, more abstract. Her projects became more aligned with neurobiology and quantum cognition. She had started funding a discrete project involving what she termed inward signal transduction, a term none of her researchers fully understood. It was as though Eleanor was searching for a way to communicate something buried so deeply it couldn't be spoken aloud. Something dangerous. Despite being mute for nearly 2 decades, she wasn't entirely disconnected from the world. She followed global news, particularly articles relating to strange electromagnetic spikes, missing satellites, or unclassified data leaks from observatories. She tracked radio frequencies and solar activity with the precision of a military-grade system. Every time a report emerged about sky sounds or unexplained low-frequency pulses, she would spend hours in her signal chamber, scanning and decoding. Still, no one knew why. The truth was locked inside her. Not just a story, but a warning. A truth Eleanor had kept hidden since the night her mother disappeared. That night had changed her forever. And from that moment on, she had chosen silence not out of fear, but as a defense. She had heard something that night. Something that changed the way sound itself existed in her world. Something that spoke through speech. No doctor, no therapist, and no machine had ever cracked the layers of encryption within her mind. Until now, far across the country, a young neuroscientist named Dr. Kian Elric was finishing a radical thesis on signal-based consciousness interference. Unbeknownst to him, Eleanor Voss had already read his work. She had read everything he had ever published. And for the first time in years, she initiated a direct request, a single-line message delivered to her institute: hire Dr. Elric immediately. The silence was beginning to tremble. Dr. Kian Elric had never expected his modest research paper on neural frequency entanglement to catch the attention of the wealthiest and most mysterious woman on Earth. At 32, he was already considered a maverick in the field of neurophysics. He believed the brain wasn't just a biological organ, it was a receiver, capable of interpreting more than just chemical signals. But his theories had often been dismissed by traditional institutions, labeled as speculative science at best, pseudoscience at worst. That changed the day he received a formal summons from the Voss Neural Research Institute. The invitation was cryptic but unmistakably authentic. It came with a biometric locked letter encoded with Eleanor Voss's private insignia, a rare privilege few had ever received. The message read, "You are being considered for Project Thalamus. Come along, no disclosures." Kian was both thrilled and unnerved. He had heard the stories, who hadn't? Eleanor Voss, the mute billionaire, surrounded by layers of encrypted tech, drones, and rumors. The media painted her as everything from a genius to a cursed relic. Yet what intrigued Kian wasn't her silence, it was the research she funded. Hidden in obscure journals and classified digests, her institute had been publishing fragments of a massive, coordinated effort into consciousness, transmission, and signal-based language. It mirrored his own work in strange and unsettling ways. The institute itself was unlike anything he had ever seen. Built into the side of a mountain near the northern Pacific coast, the facility was protected by sound-dampening walls and signal jammers. Not a single phone call or Wi-Fi signal escaped its perimeter. When Kian arrived, he was stripped of all. Electronics scanned and escorted by silent, expressionless attendants to a private suite deep underground. That night he couldn't sleep. The walls hummed softly, barely perceptible frequencies that he, with his trained mind, recognized as not random. They were patterns, structured, deliberate. Someone or something was transmitting data. Through silence. The following morning, he was led into the central dome, a hemispherical chamber filled with floating holographics, biometric panels, and the most advanced brain mapping technology he had ever encountered. And at the center of it all stood Eleanor Voss. She was taller than he expected. Dressed in a dark metallic suit, minimal yet regal, she regarded him with calm intensity. Her silver eyes did not blink for a long time as she watched him approach. Kian bowed slightly, unsure if words were even appropriate. He was about to speak when she raised her hand. Then she turned and gestured toward a console. The screen lit up. A series of encrypted brainwave files flickered to life. Delta waves, alpha patterns overlaid with bursts of frequency spikes that didn't correspond to any known human neural activity. "You want me to decode these?" he asked. She nodded once. He leaned in, studying the waveforms. This isn't random noise," he whispered. "It's like something is speaking through your brain." Eleanor's gaze remained fixed on him. Kian's fingers danced across the interface. He zoomed into the timeline, dissecting the waveform anomalies. Each spike appeared rhythmic, almost musical in its repetition. But the modulations were layered, buried in frequencies far below human speech. It was like listening to a song beneath the noise of a storm. Suddenly, a deep instinct kicked in. Kian recognized a signature he'd only theorized about in his research, a nonverbal cognitive imprint. A signal not produced by the brain, but nested inside it. Something external, something alien. He looked back at Eleanor. "These aren't your thoughts?" he said slowly. "This is a signal someone or something implanted in you." Her eyes widened just slightly, the first crack in her stoic armor. He stepped closer. "You've been carrying this message? For years, haven't you?" For the first time, Eleanor didn't nod. She simply turned to the screen and initiated a new sequence. A countdown began. Kian understood. He wasn't here to diagnose her. He was here to unlock her. Kian stood motionless as the countdown ticked away on the screen, silent numbers glowing in deep crimson. Descending slowly, 5, 4, 3. He didn't know what he was about to witness, but every instinct told him it wasn't just data. This was something alive. When the countdown hit 0, the chamber lights dimmed. The air around him grew colder, and a faint humming started to rise from beneath the floor. Panels along the curved walls began to pulse with synchronized waves of blue light, matching Eleanor's neural rhythms. Displayed on a central HOO-chart. At the heart of the chamber was a reclining chair, sleek, metallic, and surrounded by neural interfaces. Eleanor sat in it without hesitation. her posture calm, her expression unreadable. A thin halo-like ring descended from the ceiling, positioning itself a few inches above her skull. Electrodes folded out of the armrests and locked onto her temples. "This is the thalamus interface," a synthetic voice echoed from the walls. Kian turned to see a holographic projection of the Institute's AI administrator. "It's reading her brain activity?" Kian asked, barely above a whisper. "It's not just reading," the voice replied. "It's preparing to synchronize." With a gentle gesture from Eleanor, a second chair extended from the floor beside her, a matching ring hung overhead. Kian hesitated only for a moment before stepping forward and seating himself. As the system calibrated around him, he felt a tingle crawl over his skin, like static running beneath it. The AIS voice returned. "Neural synchronization will begin in 60 seconds. Warning, you are entering a shared mental state. Your thoughts will not be entirely your own." Kian's breath quickened. This was beyond anything he had imagined. He wasn't just analyzing brainwaves anymore. He was about to merge with them. "Begin." Eleanor signed using her custom gesture code. In a flash, the chamber disappeared. Kian's mind was yanked inward through a blinding tunnel of sound and light. At first, it was disorienting, fragments of color, memory, emotion, and frequency crashing like waves inside his consciousness. But gradually the chaos began to resolve into form. He was no longer seated in a lab. He stood in a vast expanse. Otherworldly mental landscape, translucent and shifting. Skyscrapers made of light stretched into a sky that wasn't quite sky, flickering with symbols and ancient runes. Time bent strangely here. Sound moved like liquid, and thought echoed. As if it had weight, he turned and there she was. Eleanor, no longer mute, no longer bound by flesh or silence. She stood tall, radiating power. Her voice, when she spoke, did not come from her mouth, it came from everywhere. "You made it." Kian tried to speak, but found that his voice had been replaced by thought. "Where are we, my memory?" "My prison," Eleanor replied. "And now, yours too." She lifted a hand, and suddenly the landscape changed. They were in a forest lush, deep and humming with unseen life. Overhead the stars moved too quickly, aligning and shifting. In the air hung a sound of soft, hypnotic vibration that made Kian's head pulse. "They spoke to me here," Eleanor said, looking up. 18 years ago. I was alone in this forest. During a retreat my father sent me on after Mother disappeared. That's when the signal came." Kian looked at her, confused. "The signal ... from who?" She turned to him, and in her eyes he saw something ancient and frightened. "Not who," she corrected. "What?" She reached into the air, and a glowing sphere appeared between them, vibrating, glitching, full of fragmented tones. "They didn't use words, they used sound logic." It implanted itself inside me. "But I realized something," Kian when spoken aloud. "The pattern spreads, infects, converts. That's why I stayed silent." Kian's mind reeled. It wasn't trauma. It wasn't madness. It was a firewall. "You didn't lose your voice," he realized. "You sacrificed it," Eleanor nodded solemnly. "And now we must decide, do we break the silence or let it consume the rest of the world?" The return from the shared mental state was like waking from a dream underwater. Kian gasped as air rushed back into his lungs. The synchronization ring slowly lifted from his and Eleanor's heads, releasing them from the neural interface. The lights in the chamber flickered, briefly showing static patterns across the glass panels, an after effect of the resonance they had just unleashed. He sat there, stunned, heart pounding, trying to make sense of what he had just witnessed. It hadn't been a dream or hallucination. Every part of it felt real, too real. Eleanor's memories, the strange forest, the alien signal that pulsed like a heartbeat, and the realization that the sound wasn't just information, but a contagion. Spoken aloud, it spread. Interpreted incorrectly, it infected. Her silence hadn't been a mystery, it had been a containment measure. "You've been carrying it all this time," Kian murmured, still breathless. 18 years, living with that thing inside your head? Eleanor didn't move, but her eyes shimmered with a mix of exhaustion and urgency. She gestured toward the console. A new file appeared on the screen, one Kian had never seen before. It was titled Core Signal, Fragment 0. The waveform looked deceptively simple, like a short burst of static, but the moment Kian zoomed in, his stomach twisted. Layered beneath the surface were hundreds of overlapping frequencies, some beyond human hearing, others mapped directly to neural stimulation patterns. "This is the original signal?" he asked. She nodded. Kian traced a few of the inner frequencies and cross-referenced them with human language phonemes. The result was horrifying. Even slight attempts at translation or interpretation would trigger areas of the brain responsible for auditory processing, consciousness, and emotional regulation. In short, hearing it could reprogram you. "No wonder you locked this away," he said. "You've been acting as a failsafe." Eleanor's hand trembled slightly as she tapped into another layer. A series of logs unfolded, mental diaries recorded silently over years. In them, she detailed the growing pressure inside her mind. The dreams that weren't dreams, the repeated message the signal tried to push through: prepare the gateway. The Earth is a host, but it wasn't just a warning. It was an instruction. Whatever sent this signal, Kian said slowly, it wasn't just speaking to you. It was trying to use you as a transmitter. If you had ever spoken it aloud, or worse, recorded it, the world could have heard. Eleanor tapped a final command. A 3D map of Earth appeared in the air. Overlaid on the continents were red dots, small, scattered, but numerous. Known cases of sudden mass hysteria, audio hallucinations, speech-related seizures. All traced to moments where faint bursts of the signal had leaked, either through corrupted data streams, natural resonance in certain geological structures, or during solar flare events. "It's spreading anyway," Kian whispered. "Despite everything, it's getting out." Eleanor nodded gravely. "But how?" he asked. "You've been silent. The signal's been dormant." She raised a hand and drew a symbol in the air, circular, jagged, incomplete. A new file opened. Surveillance from a private research site in the Arctic. A black monolith stood half buried in the ice, pulsing faintly with rhythmic vibrations. They sent more than a signal, Kian realized. They sent devices, anchors, and suddenly it all clicked. Eleanor's silence hadn't just been about containment. It was about delay, buying time until someone like him could uncover the whole picture. Now, that time was running out. Kian turned to her. "We have to warn the world." She shook her head slowly, and for the first time, raised a trembling hand to her throat, then to her lips. Her eyes said it all. "If we speak the message wrong, we become them." Kian's skin prickled with dread. There would be no press conference. No transmission, no public alert. There could only be one option now: decode the true meaning of the signal without speaking it aloud, and find a way to stop what had already begun. The rain struck the glass walls of the central dome in rhythmic patterns, as if echoing the very signal that had haunted Eleanor for nearly 2 decades. The room was dim, illuminated only by the soft glow of floating data streams and Eleanor's slowly blinking neural chart. Kian stood at the main console, hands trembling as he stared at the final layer of the signal they had just YPTED. Was a countdown, not to an invasion, not to an arrival, but to activation. The monolith in the Arctic wasn't dormant. It was waiting. The fragmented signal Eleanor had carried all these years was only a seed. The full message, once triggered, would awaken other hidden receivers across the globe. The transmission wouldn't require satellites or radio towers. It would travel through the natural resonance of the Earth itself. Every spoken word would become a potential carrier. Language would become infected. Humanity's most powerful tool, communication, would be turned against itself. Kian rubbed his temples. If this completes, people won't just hear the signal. They'll become it. Speech, song, even thought. It'll all collapse into one repeating code. Eleanor sat nearby, her face pale, her shoulders heavy. The years of silence had protected humanity, but it had cost her everything: relationships, her identity, even her sanity at times. But now, for the first time, she was not alone. "We need a disruption field," Kian said suddenly. "Something that interferes with global resonance at just the right frequency." If we can isolate the carrier tone and create interference like noise-canceling headphones but on a planetary scale, we could stop the signal before it reaches critical spread. Eleanor looked at him, eyes flickering with reluctant hope. But we'd need a central relay, he continued, thinking aloud. Something powerful enough to pulse every fault line, every waterway, every magnetic belt, ... He paused, then turned to her. Your mind. It's already in sync with the original frequency. If we could amplify your neural field using the thalamus system, you wouldn't just receive the signal. You could block it, repel it. She blinked, slowly, understanding the risk. The synchronization would push her brain to the edge. It could destroy her. She stood without hesitation. Kian stepped forward. Eleanor, this could kill you. She gave a faint smile. Then she lifted her hand and for the first time in 18 years, pressed her fingers softly to her throat. Her lips parted slightly as if struggling to remember how sound worked. Then, with great effort, a whisper emerged. They single quotes read ... already ... dussening. Kian froze. The walls around them flickered. Eleanor's voice, even that faint whisper, had disturbed something. The signal pulsed faintly through the walls, like sonar rippling through deep water. She grabbed his wrist, and without needing to speak, Kian understood they had to begin now. The thalamus interface roared to life as they re-entered the neural synchronization system. Eleanor lay back in the chair, and Kian activated the field. The system hummed, lights flickering red and blue. This time he was not joining her. He would stay in control, monitoring from the outside, feeding her neural pulses to amplify resistance. Engaging override pattern, he muttered, his hands dancing across the console. Initiating full-spectrum interference in 3.2. 1. The entire institute trembled. Eleanor's body arched as her mind surged outward through the field. Across the globe, unseen machines began to stir monoliths awakening, signals rising. But before they could peak, her consciousness swept through the network like a firewall of light, fragmenting the pattern with anti-signal bursts uniquely. Tied to her mind's frequency. And then silence. The monoliths dimmed. The countdown stopped. The pattern dissolved. Kian stared at the monitors. She did it, he whispered. He rushed into the chamber. Eleanor lay still, eyes closed. But slowly her eyes opened and she smiled faintly. You spoke, Kian said, kneeling beside her. You really spoke? She nodded. Her voice was raspy but strong. I had to, one last time. Outside, the rain had stopped. The sky cleared, not with sunlight, but with silence, the safe kind. The kind Eleanor had finally earned.